It's 3 a.m. in Rome, and you're standing before a door that hasn't opened for most visitors in over 4 centuries. Behind this door lies 53 miles of shelving, containing documents that chronicle nearly every significant event in Western civilization since the year 1198. The air carries the weight of 800 years of secrets. And somewhere in the darkness beyond, a single archivist moves between towering manuscripts with the careful precision of someone who guards the world's most dangerous knowledge. This is the Vatican Secret Archives, or as they prefer to call it now, the Vatican Apostolic Archives. The name change in 2019 was supposedly about transparency. But here's what should make you pause. If you wanted to visit this place, if you somehow managed to meet their impossibly strict requirements and gained access, you would still be forbidden from seeing roughly 90% of what lies within those walls. The question isn't just what they're hiding. It's why, after nearly a millennium, the need for such secrecy has only grown stronger. Before we dive deeper into this labyrinth of hidden knowledge, I invite you to subscribe and share in the comment. What hour gently wraps around you? How are you feeling here at the end of your long day, standing at the threshold of so many unsolved secrets? Take a moment and really consider what you're about to hear. Because once we start pulling at these threads, once we begin to see the patterns that connect medieval banking scandals to modern geopolitics, papal infallibility to scientific suppression, you might find yourself questioning not just what the Vatican has hidden, but why our entire understanding of history might have been carefully curated for us. If you're ready for that journey, if you're willing to follow the evidence wherever it leads, then stay with me. And if this exploration challenges your assumptions the way it challenged mine, consider sharing it with others who might be ready to question what they think they know. The story we're about to uncover has been buried for centuries, but truth has a way of finding the light. Now, let me tell you what happened when I started asking questions about that locked door in Rome. In the heart of Vatican City, beneath the grandeur of St. Peter's Basilica and the political theater of papal audiences, lies a building that most of the world's 7 billion people will never see. The Vatican Secret Archives stretch through underground chambers and climate-controlled vaults, housing what may be the most comprehensive collection of Western historical documents ever assembled under one roof. Yet for all the Vatican's recent claims about transparency and scholarly access, a peculiar truth emerges when you examine the numbers. Of the approximately 85 kilometers of documents housed within these walls, current estimates suggest that less than 10% have ever been made available to outside researchers. The remaining 90% remains locked away, accessible only to a handful of Vatican employees who have taken oaths of secrecy that bind them for life. This isn't simply about bureaucratic inefficiency or the practical challenges of cataloging ancient manuscripts. The pattern of what has been released versus what remains hidden reveals a deliberate curation that raises profound questions about the nature of historical truth itself. Consider the mathematics of concealment. If we accept the Vatican's own estimates that they possess approximately 35 million documents, and if we acknowledge that current scholarly access represents less than 10% of this collection, then we must confront an uncomfortable reality. Our understanding of European history, the development of Christianity, the relationship between church and state, and countless pivotal moments in human civilization has been shaped by what amounts to a carefully selected sample of available evidence. But here's where the mystery deepens. When researchers do gain access to previously sealed documents, they consistently discover that the official historical narratives we've been taught often require significant revision. The Galileo files, partially opened in the 1980s, revealed that the Church's persecution of scientific inquiry was far more systematic and long-lasting than previously acknowledged. The World War II documents, gradually released over decades, have exposed financial relationships between the Vatican and fascist regimes that continue to reshape our understanding of the Church's role during humanity's darkest hour. Each release has followed the same pattern: decades of official denial, followed by limited access under strict conditions, followed by revelations that force historians to rewrite established narratives. Yet each release represents a tiny fraction of what remains hidden, suggesting that what we've learned so far might be merely the tip of a much larger iceberg of concealed truth. The Vatican's own archivists, when pressed about the pace of document release, consistently invoke the same justification. Some knowledge, they argue, is too dangerous for public consumption. Some truths, they suggest, would destabilize the foundations of social order if revealed prematurely. This raises a question that cuts to the heart of human civilization. Who has the right to determine what truths humanity is ready to handle? But there's another possibility that the Vatican's defenders rarely acknowledge. What if the primary danger isn't to social stability, but to the institution itself? What if the real secret hidden within those 53 miles of shelving isn't a collection of dangerous truths, but evidence of a pattern of deception so extensive that its revelation would fundamentally alter how we understand the relationship between knowledge and power in Western civilization? The Vatican Secret Archives weren't established to preserve history. They were created to control it. And once you understand this distinction, everything else begins to make a different kind of sense. The year 1198 marked more than just the beginning of papal record-keeping. It represented the moment when the Catholic Church began systematically documenting its transformation from a religious institution into a temporal empire. Pope Innocent III, who established the foundation of what would become the Secret Archives, was perhaps the most politically astute pontiff in church history. And his decision to begin comprehensive documentation wasn't driven by scholarly interest or historical preservation. It was a strategic necessity for maintaining control over an increasingly complex web of political alliances, financial arrangements, and territorial claims that stretched across Europe and beyond. What makes this historical moment particularly intriguing is what's missing from the earliest collections. While documents from 1198 onwards are relatively well preserved, the Vatican possesses remarkably few authentic records from the preceding centuries, particularly from the period between 800 and 1100 CE. This gap, which historians euphemistically call the documentary lacuna, coincides with some of the most transformative centuries in European history. The height of the Byzantine Empire's influence, the establishment of the Holy Roman Empire, the rise of Islamic civilization in Spain, and the mysterious emergence of the Templar banking system. Official explanations for this missing millennium typically invoke the usual suspects: Viking raids, political instability, primitive record-keeping practices, and the natural deterioration of ancient documents. But these explanations become less convincing when you consider that the Vatican has somehow managed to preserve documents from the same period that originated in equally unstable regions, particularly those that support its territorial and theological claims. The pattern suggests not accidental loss, but systematic removal or suppression of documents that might complicate the Church's official narrative about its own development. The surviving documents from this foundational period reveal an institution that was already operating with remarkable sophistication in matters of international finance, political intelligence, and territorial expansion. Papal correspondence from the early 13th century discusses banking arrangements with Venetian merchants, intelligence networks that span from Constantinople to London, and financial instruments that wouldn't look out of place in a modern investment portfolio. This level of institutional sophistication doesn't develop overnight, yet the documentary evidence for its development has been almost entirely erased from the historical record. More unsettling is what these early documents reveal about the relationship between religious authority and political power. The papal bulls and diplomatic correspondence from this period make it clear that the Church had already developed sophisticated methods for manipulating secular rulers, controlling information flow, and eliminating potential threats to papal authority. The language used in internal Church communications from this era is remarkably frank about these political calculations, suggesting that the careful separation between spiritual and temporal concerns that characterizes later Church rhetoric was initially understood to be a public relations strategy rather than a genuine theological principle. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of these early documents is what they tell us about the Church's relationship with knowledge itself. References to dangerous texts and prohibited learning appear with striking frequency in papal correspondence from this period, along with detailed discussions of strategies for limiting access to certain types of information. The Index of Forbidden Books, officially established in 1559, was clearly the culmination of a much older tradition of information control that had been operating informally for centuries. The Vatican Secret Archives, in other words, weren't created to preserve knowledge. They were designed to control its distribution. The very act of classification, of determining which documents would be preserved and which would be allowed to disappear, represented a form of historical engineering that would shape European civilization for centuries to come. This understanding transforms how we interpret the Vatican's continuing secrecy about its holdings. The real secret isn't any particular document or revelation. It's the scope and sophistication of the Church's historical role as an information control system. And once you begin to see this pattern in the medieval documents, you start to notice it everywhere else as well. In the autumn of 1632, as Galileo Galilei stood trial before the Roman Inquisition, the aged scientist faced more than just accusations of heresy. He confronted a system of knowledge control that had been refined over centuries, one that understood the profound connection between cosmological theory and political authority. The documents surrounding Galileo's trial, partially released by the Vatican in the 1980s, reveal a story far more complex and disturbing than the simplified narrative of scientific progress versus religious dogma that most of us learned in school. The official story, repeated in countless textbooks and popular histories, presents Galileo's persecution as an unfortunate example of religious narrow-mindedness, eventually overcome by the march of scientific enlightenment. The Catholic Church, according to this narrative, eventually recognized its error and rehabilitated Galileo, symbolically acknowledging the superiority of empirical observation over doctrinal authority. It's a comforting story that allows us to believe that truth inevitably triumphs over institutional power, that progress is inevitable, and that the forces of knowledge naturally overcome the forces of ignorance. But the Galileo files tell a different story entirely. The recently released documents reveal that the Church's opposition to Galilean astronomy wasn't primarily based on scriptural interpretation or theological conservatism. Instead, Vatican officials understood with remarkable clarity that accepting the heliocentric model would undermine the entire philosophical foundation upon which papal authority rested. If the Earth wasn't the center of the universe, if humanity wasn't the focal point of divine creation, then the Church's claim to serve as the essential intermediary between God and humanity became much harder to justify. More troubling are the documents that reveal the systematic suppression of other scientific works that never achieved Galileo's fame. References to confiscated manuscripts, imprisoned scholars, and disappeared research appear throughout the Inquisition records from this period. Galileo's case became famous precisely because he was prominent enough that his persecution couldn't be completely hidden. But the documentary evidence suggests that for every Galileo whose story we know, there were dozens of other scientists whose work was eliminated without trace. The Vatican's internal communications from this period are particularly revealing about the Church's understanding of the relationship between scientific knowledge and social control. Papal advisors explicitly acknowledged that empirical investigation, if allowed to proceed unchecked, would eventually undermine not just religious authority, but the entire hierarchical structure of European society. The suppression of scientific inquiry wasn't an unfortunate byproduct of religious conservatism. It was a calculated strategy for maintaining institutional power. But here's where the story takes an even more disturbing turn. The documents released in the 1980s, which formed the basis for the Church's official rehabilitation of Galileo, represent only a small fraction of the Vatican's Galileo-related holdings. Archival inventories suggest that the majority of documents relating to the trial, including the complete proceedings of the Inquisition and the full text of Galileo's interrogations, remain classified to this day. Why would the Vatican continue to withhold documents from a trial that supposedly demonstrates the Church's eventual acceptance of scientific truth? The answer becomes clearer when you examine what the released documents carefully avoid discussing: the broader system of scientific suppression that continued long after Galileo's death. Buried within the accessible Galileo files are brief references to something called the Congregation for the Suppression of Dangerous Knowledge, an informal Vatican organization that appears to have operated continuously from the 17th century through at least the early 20th century. The few references to this organization describe systematic efforts to identify, acquire, and suppress scientific research that might threaten Church authority or social stability. The scope of this operation, based on the fragmentary evidence available, appears to have been far more extensive than anything previously acknowledged in official Church histories. The Galileo trial, in other words, wasn't an isolated incident or a historical aberration. It was merely the most visible example of a comprehensive system of knowledge control that operated for centuries. And the Vatican's continuing secrecy about the complete Galileo files suggests that this system may not be as historical as we'd like to believe. The real question isn't whether the Church eventually acknowledged its error regarding Galileo. The real question is what other scientific knowledge has been suppressed, what discoveries have been hidden, and what innovations have been prevented from reaching the broader world. The Galileo files that remain hidden may contain answers to these questions, but they also raise a more fundamental issue. If powerful institutions have been systematically controlling scientific knowledge for centuries, how can we be certain that our current understanding of the natural world is complete or accurate? The shadow of the Inquisition, it seems, may be longer than we've been allowed to know. In March of 1944, as Allied forces closed in on Rome and the Nazi occupation of Italy began to crumble, a series of meetings took place within the Vatican walls that would remain classified for over 70 years. The participants included high-ranking Church officials, representatives of major European banks, and a small group of individuals whose identities remain redacted in even the most recently released documents. The subject of these meetings, according to the fragmentary records that have been made public, was the preservation of Christian assets in the post-war period. A euphemism that masked one of the most sophisticated money laundering operations in modern history. The Vatican's role during World War II has been the subject of intense historical debate. with defenders arguing that Pope Pius XII's apparent neutrality represented a pragmatic attempt to preserve church institutions and protect Catholic populations. While critics contend that the Vatican's silence regarding the Holocaust represented moral complicity with fascist regimes. Both sides of this debate, however, have largely overlooked the financial dimension of the Vatican's wartime activities, a dimension that becomes much clearer when you examine the banking records that were quietly released in 2019 as part of the Vatican's promised transparency initiatives. These financial documents reveal that the Vatican didn't simply maintain diplomatic relations with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. It served as a crucial financial intermediary for a network of transactions that allowed high-ranking Nazi officials to convert their stolen assets into portable wealth that could be accessed after the war. The mechanism was elegant in its simplicity. Stolen gold, artwork, and other valuables were donated to the Vatican as religious contributions, immediately converted into Swiss bank accounts or investment portfolios, and then made available to designated recipients through a network of Catholic institutions across South America. The Vatican Bank, officially known as the Institute for the Works of Religion, had been established in 1942 with precisely this type of financial flexibility in mind. Unlike traditional banks, it operated under Vatican sovereignty and was therefore exempt from the financial regulations and oversight requirements that governed other international financial institutions. This exemption, combined with the Church's global network of institutions and its privileged diplomatic status, created an ideal infrastructure for moving large amounts of wealth across international borders without detection or documentation. But the Nazi gold was only the beginning. The documents released in 2019 reveal that the Vatican's wartime financial operations were part of a much larger system that had been operating since at least the early 20th century. References to similar arrangements with Spanish fascists during the Civil War, Italian industrialists during the rise of Mussolini, and various Eastern European oligarchs suggest that the Vatican had developed a sophisticated business model that transcended any particular political ideology or historical moment. The most disturbing aspect of these revelations isn't the financial corruption itself. It's the systematic nature of the deception that followed. For decades after the war, Vatican officials consistently denied any significant financial relationship with fascist regimes, characterizing the Church's wartime role as humanitarian and apolitical. They established elaborate charitable organizations, funded historical research projects, and sponsored educational initiatives that reinforced this narrative of moral neutrality and humanitarian concern. Meanwhile, the same institutions that publicly promoted this rehabilitated image of Vatican wartime activities were quietly managing investment portfolios that had been built on stolen Jewish assets, using the returns to fund political organizations across Europe and Latin America that promoted conservative Catholic social policies. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. An institution that publicly positioned itself as a moral authority while privately profiting from genocide. The financial records also reveal something else that has received less attention in historical analyses. The Vatican's post-war financial operations were just as sophisticated and morally problematic as their wartime activities. The so-called rat lines that helped Nazi war criminals escape to South America weren't just humanitarian efforts to prevent post-war violence. They were business operations that generated substantial revenue for Vatican institutions while ensuring the continued loyalty of individuals who possessed detailed knowledge of church wartime activities. Perhaps most significantly, the recently released documents suggest that the Vatican's wartime financial operations established patterns of international money laundering and political influence that continued long after 1945. References to Project Gladio, the CIA-sponsored operation to prevent communist electoral victories in Western Europe, appear throughout Vatican financial records from the 1950s and 1960s, suggesting that the Church's wartime collaboration with fascist regimes evolved seamlessly into Cold War collaboration with American intelligence services. The Vatican's response to these revelations has followed a predictable pattern: acknowledgement of historical errors, combined with claims that such activities represent historical aberrations rather than institutional characteristics. But the financial records tell a different story. They reveal an institution that has consistently used its unique position to facilitate the movement of illicit wealth, to provide financial services to questionable political movements, and to operate as a sovereign financial institution accountable to no external authority. The Nazi gold thread, when you follow it carefully, doesn't lead to a historical scandal that can be safely relegated to the past. It leads to a pattern of financial activity that raises profound questions about the Vatican's current operations and its ongoing role in global financial networks. The real secret hidden in these wartime documents isn't what the Vatican did during World War II. It's what these activities reveal about the institution's fundamental relationship with money, power, and moral authority. And if the Vatican was willing to profit from genocide, what other moral boundaries might it be willing to cross in pursuit of its institutional interests? October 13th, 1307, remains one of the most significant dates in medieval history, yet most people know it only as the beginning of the end for the Knights Templar. On that date, King Philip IV of France ordered the simultaneous arrest of Templars throughout his kingdom, accusing them of heresy, blasphemy, and various occult practices. The official narrative tells us that this marked the destruction of the Templar order, culminating in the execution of their Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, in 1314, and the dissolution of their vast financial empire. But recently released documents from the Vatican Secret Archives suggest a far more complex story, one that transforms our understanding not just of medieval history, but of the financial and political structures that continue to shape our world today. The Chinon parchment, discovered in the Vatican Secret Archives in 2001, and finally made public in 2007, revealed that Pope Clement V had actually absolved the Templar leadership of the charges of heresy that provided the justification for their persecution. This document, which had been misfiled for nearly 700 years, proved that the Vatican had secretly maintained that the Templars were innocent of the accusations that led to their destruction, while publicly supporting the French king's actions against the order. But the Chinon parchment was just the beginning. Subsequent document releases have revealed extensive correspondence between Vatican officials and surviving Templar networks throughout the 14th and 15th centuries, suggesting that reports of the order's complete destruction were greatly exaggerated. More disturbing are the financial records that show remarkable continuities between Templar banking practices and Vatican financial operations that began appearing in the decades following the order's supposed dissolution. The Templars had been medieval Europe's most sophisticated financial institution, developing innovative banking techniques that enabled international commerce and provided financial services to kings, merchants, and pilgrims across the known world. Their system of international credit transfers, secured loans, and investment partnerships represented a level of financial sophistication that wouldn't be matched by secular institutions for centuries. When the order was officially dissolved, this entire financial infrastructure supposedly disappeared overnight. Except it didn't. Vatican financial records from the 14th century reveal the sudden appearance of banking practices that were virtually identical to Templar methods, operated by individuals whose names don't appear in any official church hierarchies, and managed through institutions that had no apparent connection to traditional Catholic administrative structures. The timing is too precise to be coincidental. Within months of the Templar dissolution, the Vatican had somehow acquired financial capabilities that took the Templars centuries to develop. More intriguing are the architectural and symbolic continuities. Churches built under Vatican direction in the decades following the Templars' suppression incorporated architectural elements that were distinctively Templar, including specific geometric proportions, symbolic arrangements, and hidden chambers that served no apparent liturgical function. The most famous example is the Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, built by William Sinclair in the mid-15th century, which contains Templar symbolism so extensive and explicit that it's impossible to interpret as coincidental. But perhaps the most compelling evidence for Templar survival lies in the Vatican's own administrative structures. Beginning in the 14th century, the Church established a series of semi-autonomous organizations that operated with unusual independence from papal authority, managed their own financial affairs, and maintained their own internal hierarchies. These organizations, which included various military orders, charitable foundations, and educational institutions, functioned according to organizational principles that were remarkably similar to Templar structures. The pattern suggests not the destruction of the Templar order, but its absorption into the Vatican's institutional framework. Rather than eliminating a potential rival, the Church appears to have co-opted Templar expertise, incorporated their financial methods, and integrated their personnel into Catholic structures while maintaining the public fiction of their destruction. This interpretation gains additional support from the geographical distribution of post-Templar Vatican activities. Church investments, missionary enterprises, and political alliances in the centuries following 1307 consistently focused on regions that had been central to Templar operations: the Mediterranean basin, the trade routes to the east, and the emerging commercial centers of Northern Europe. The Vatican's sudden expertise in international commerce and banking becomes much more explicable if we assume that it acquired this expertise by incorporating existing Templar networks rather than developing it independently. The financial records also reveal something else that has been largely overlooked in traditional histories. The Vatican's post-Templar expansion wasn't just about religion or politics. It was about maintaining control over the emerging European economy. By absorbing the Templar financial infrastructure while publicly supporting their destruction, the Church eliminated potential competition while acquiring the capabilities necessary to influence European commerce and politics for centuries to come. If the Templars weren't actually destroyed, but were instead absorbed into Vatican structures, then the financial and political networks that trace their origins to the medieval period may be far more continuous and influential than previously acknowledged. The Vatican's current financial operations, its global political influence, and its remarkable institutional resilience begin to make more sense when viewed as the continuation of a tradition that stretches back to the Crusades. The Templar connection also suggests something else that's rarely discussed in analyses of Vatican power: the possibility that some of the Church's most closely guarded secrets relate not to theological or historical matters, but to financial and political arrangements that have been maintained for centuries. The Vatican Secret Archives may contain documents that reveal the full extent of this institutional continuity, but they may also contain evidence of ongoing relationships and obligations that trace their origins to medieval. The disappeared Templars may not have disappeared at all. They may simply have learned to hide in plain sight, maintaining their essential functions while adopting new organizational forms and public identities. And if that's true, then understanding the modern Vatican requires understanding not just Catholic theology and history, but the financial and political legacy of an order that was supposedly destroyed 7 centuries ago. The year 1947 marked a turning point in Vatican-American relations that would reshape global politics for decades to come. Yet the full extent of this transformation remained hidden until a series of document releases beginning in 2010. These files reveal that the emerging Cold War provided cover for an unprecedented expansion of Vatican influence in American foreign policy, one that went far beyond the traditional boundaries of religious diplomacy and ventured into the realm of covert operations, psychological warfare, and systematic social engineering. The relationship began with a shared recognition. Both the Vatican and American intelligence services understood that the ideological battle against communism required more than military or economic strategies. It demanded a comprehensive approach to shaping public consciousness, cultural values, and political loyalties across entire populations. The Catholic Church, with its global institutional presence and its sophisticated understanding of mass psychology, represented an ideal partner for American intelligence operations that required both international reach and moral legitimacy. Operation Gladio, the classified NATO program designed to prevent communist electoral victories in Western Europe, represents perhaps the most extensively documented example of this collaboration. Recently declassified CIA documents reveal that Vatican institutions served as crucial intermediaries for funding anti-communist political movements, providing both financial channels that avoided official government oversight and moral authorization that legitimized otherwise questionable political activities. But the Vatican's role in Gladio was just the beginning. Documents released in 2015 revealed the existence of a parallel program, codenamed Operation Splendor, that focused specifically on American domestic politics. This program used Catholic institutions within the United States to promote political candidates and policy positions that aligned with both Vatican interests and CIA strategic objectives, creating a sophisticated system of influence that operated beneath the radar of democratic oversight mechanisms. The mechanics of this operation were elegant in their simplicity. Catholic charitable organizations, educational institutions, and media outlets received funding that originated with CIA-front organizations but was channeled through Vatican financial networks to obscure its ultimate source. These institutions then promoted political messaging that appeared to be based on religious principles but was actually crafted to advance specific geopolitical objectives. The effectiveness of this system becomes apparent when you examine American political discourse during the Cold War period. The consistent alignment between Catholic Church positions and CIA strategic objectives during this era wasn't coincidental. It was the result of systematic coordination between Vatican officials and American intelligence operatives who worked together to shape public opinion on issues ranging from labor relations to foreign policy. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this collaboration was its explicit focus on manipulating democratic processes. Internal CIA documents from the 1950s and 1960s describe detailed strategies for using Catholic institutions to influence American elections, including specific techniques for mobilizing Catholic voters, discrediting opposition candidates, and promoting policy positions that served intelligence community interests while appearing to be motivated by religious convictions. The scope of this operation extended far beyond traditional political activities. Educational curricula in Catholic schools, content in Catholic media outlets, and even the themes emphasized in Catholic religious services were coordinated with CIA messaging objectives. The goal wasn't simply to influence specific political outcomes. It was to shape the fundamental worldview of millions of American Catholics in ways that would support intelligence community objectives for generations to come. The partnership also worked in reverse. Vatican intelligence networks, which had been operating since medieval times, provided American intelligence services with information and access that would have been impossible to obtain through conventional channels. Catholic institutions in communist countries served as informal intelligence gathering operations, while Vatican diplomatic channels provided unofficial communication pathways between American officials and foreign governments. But the most significant aspect of this collaboration may have been its role in developing the modern techniques of mass manipulation that continue to shape American politics today. The psychological research conducted jointly by Vatican and CIA operatives during the Cold War period pioneered methods of social engineering that combined religious motivation with scientific understanding of human behavior to create unprecedented capabilities for influencing public opinion and political behavior. The documents reveal experiments in using religious symbolism to trigger specific emotional responses, techniques for embedding political messages within religious content, and strategies for using religious authority to override rational analysis of political issues. These methods, developed during the height of the Cold War, bear striking similarities to the political manipulation techniques that have become commonplace in contemporary American politics. The Vatican-CIA partnership also established precedents for institutional collaboration that extended far beyond the Cold War period. The networks created during the 1950s and 1960s provided the foundation for ongoing relationships between Catholic institutions and American intelligence services that continue to influence global politics today. Recent document releases suggest that these relationships evolved and expanded over time, adapting to new geopolitical challenges while maintaining their essential character. Perhaps most troubling is what these documents reveal about the Vatican's willingness to subordinate its religious mission to political objectives. The extensive collaboration with American intelligence services required church officials to engage in activities that were difficult to reconcile with traditional Catholic moral teachings. Deception, manipulation, and the systematic undermining of democratic processes in pursuit of institutional power. The American infiltration of Vatican operations wasn't a temporary Cold War expedient. It represented a fundamental transformation of the Church's relationship with secular power that continues to shape both institutions today. The full extent of this transformation remains hidden within the classified portions of the Vatican Secret Archives. But the documents that have been released suggest that understanding modern Vatican operations requires understanding their integration with American intelligence networks. The real question isn't whether the Vatican collaborated with American intelligence services during the Cold War. It's whether this collaboration ever actually ended, and what its continuation might mean for both religious freedom and democratic governance in the contemporary world. On the morning of May 13, 1917, 3 Portuguese children claimed to have witnessed an apparition of the Virgin Mary in a field near the village of Fatima. What began as a local religious curiosity would evolve into one of the most politically significant religious phenomena of the 20th century. One that would ultimately provide cover for some of the Vatican's most controversial political activities and most closely guarded institutional secrets. The official Fatima narrative, promoted by the Catholic Church and widely accepted by believers worldwide, describes 3 secrets revealed by the Virgin to the child visionaries. A vision of hell, a prophecy about World War II and the spread of communism, and a vision of the persecution of the Church and the attempted assassination of a pope. These secrets, according to church teaching, provided divine guidance that helped navigate the spiritual and political challenges of the modern era. But recently released documents from the Vatican Secret Archives reveal a far more complex story. One that suggests the Fatima phenomenon was systematically manipulated by church authorities to serve specific political objectives while concealing information that could have fundamentally altered the course of 20th century history. The manipulation began almost immediately. Documents released in 2017 reveal that Vatican officials were involved in coaching the child visionaries from the earliest stages of the apparitions, providing them with theological concepts and political language that would have been impossible for uneducated peasant children to develop independently. The supposed spontaneous religious experience was actually a carefully orchestrated performance designed to provide divine authorization for specific political positions. The famous Third Secret of Fatima, which was kept hidden by the Vatican for over 80 years before being partially revealed in 2000, provides the clearest example of this manipulation. The official version, released after decades of speculation, described a vision of church persecution that was interpreted as prophecy fulfilled by the 1981 assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II. But comparison with the surviving testimonies of the visionaries, preserved in various archives outside of Vatican control, reveals significant discrepancies that suggest the official version was substantially edited. More disturbing are references in newly released Vatican documents to a fourth secret that was never intended for public release. This additional prophecy, according to fragmentary references in papal correspondence from the 1940s and 1950s, contained specific predictions about the internal collapse of church authority and the exposure of systematic corruption within Vatican institutions. The prophecy apparently described a future period when the Vatican's claims to moral authority would be undermined by revelations of financial corruption, sexual abuse, and political manipulation. The historical record suggests that this fourth prophecy wasn't a mystical revelation, but rather an accurate assessment of institutional vulnerabilities that were already becoming apparent to Vatican insiders by the early 20th century. The decision to suppress this information while promoting the other Fatima secrets served multiple purposes. It provided divine authorization for specific political positions while concealing accurate predictions about institutional crises that would have undermined Vatican authority if publicly acknowledged. The political utility of the Fatima phenomenon becomes even clearer when you examine how it was deployed during the Cold War. The second secret's emphasis on the dangers of Russian communism provided perfect justification for Vatican collaboration with Western intelligence services, while the promise of Russia's eventual conversion offered a religious framework for understanding geopolitical developments that served American strategic interests. The timing wasn't coincidental. The Fatima secrets were promoted most aggressively precisely when the Vatican needed divine authorization for its controversial political alliances. But the most revealing aspect of the Fatima documents isn't what they say about religious apparitions. It's what they reveal about the Vatican's sophisticated understanding of mass psychology and political manipulation. Internal church communications from the 1940s and 1950s discuss the Fatima phenomenon in explicitly strategic terms, analyzing its effectiveness as a tool for mobilizing Catholic populations, discrediting communist movements, and legitimizing controversial church policies. The documents reveal systematic efforts to amplify and distort the Fatima message through carefully coordinated media campaigns, strategic promotion of specific interpretations, and suppression of alternative accounts that didn't serve church political objectives. The miracle of the sun, witnessed by thousands of people in 1917, becomes much more interesting when you discover that Vatican meteorologists had been tracking unusual atmospheric conditions in the region for months before the event, and that church officials had been encouraging pilgrims to expect supernatural manifestations. Perhaps most troubling are the references to ongoing Fatima-style operations in various parts of the world throughout the 20th century. The documents suggest that the Vatican learned to systematically create and manipulate religious phenomena to serve political objectives, using sophisticated understanding of psychology, media manipulation, and crowd dynamics to manufacture supernatural events that provided cover for institutional activities. The Fatima files also reveal something else that has been consistently overlooked in traditional analyses: the role of intelligence services in shaping religious narratives. References to coordination between Vatican officials and various national intelligence agencies appear throughout the Fatima documentation, suggesting that the phenomenon served not just church interests, but broader geopolitical objectives that extended far beyond religious concerns. The shadow cast by the third secret, or more accurately, the fourth secret, extends far beyond the specific case of Fatima. It reveals an institution that was willing to manipulate religious devotion for political purposes, to suppress inconvenient revelations while promoting useful ones, and to engage in systematic deception about matters that millions of believers considered sacred. The real secret of Fatima isn't what the Virgin Mary supposedly revealed to 3 Portuguese children. It's what the Vatican's handling of those revelations tells us about the relationship between religious authority and political power in the modern world. And if the Vatican was willing to manipulate one of the most significant religious phenomena of the 20th century for political purposes, what other spiritual experiences might have been manufactured, edited, or suppressed to serve institutional interests? In 1979, the Vatican established what appeared to be a routine scientific institution, the Vatican Observatory Research Group, ostensibly dedicated to astronomical research and the peaceful exploration of the cosmos. The timing seemed unremarkable. The Catholic Church had maintained astronomical facilities since the 16th century, partly to demonstrate its commitment to scientific inquiry and partly to maintain its traditional roles in calendar calculation and timekeeping. But recently declassified documents reveal that the Observatory Research Group was actually the public face of a much more ambitious and secretive program. Project Lucifer, a comprehensive investigation into phenomena that challenged the fundamental assumptions of both scientific materialism and traditional religious doctrine. The project began with a simple observation that had been troubling Vatican theologians since the early 20th century: the increasing frequency of reported paranormal experiences among practicing Catholics, particularly those involving near-death experiences, mystical visions, and encounters with deceased individuals. These reports, which were carefully documented by church investigators, appeared to follow consistent patterns that were difficult to explain using either conventional religious teachings or accepted scientific theories. Rather than dismissing these experiences as psychological aberrations or demonic deceptions, a small group of Vatican scientists and theologians began systematic investigation of what they termed consciousness anomalies. Their research, conducted in collaboration with neuroscientists, physicists, and psychologists from leading universities around the world, focused on documenting and analyzing experiences that suggested human consciousness might operate according to principles that were not yet understood by mainstream science. The results of this research, preserved in files that were partially declassified in 2018, proved to be far more significant than anyone had anticipated. Carefully controlled studies of individuals who reported near-death experiences revealed consistent physiological and neurological changes that couldn't be explained by current understanding of brain function. Even more intriguing were the reports of individuals who appeared to have acquired accurate information about distant events or deceased persons through means that couldn't be accounted for by conventional sensory mechanisms. But the most disturbing discoveries involved what the researchers termed systematic consciousness manipulation. The files document extensive research into techniques for artificially inducing mystical experiences, controlling religious visions, and manipulating spiritual beliefs through combinations of psychological conditioning, electromagnetic field manipulation, and pharmaceutical intervention. The research was justified as necessary for understanding how authentic spiritual experiences could be distinguished from artificial or deceptive ones. But the practical applications were clearly much broader. The documents reveal that by the 1990s, Vatican researchers had developed sophisticated methods for creating convincing religious experiences that could be triggered remotely and targeted at specific individuals or groups. These techniques were apparently tested extensively, initially on volunteer subjects within Vatican institutions, but eventually on unsuspecting populations in various parts of the world. The goal wasn't simply to understand religious experience. It was to develop the capability to control and direct it. Perhaps even more significant were the theoretical implications of this research. Vatican scientists had apparently discovered evidence that human consciousness operates according to principles that fundamentally challenge materialist assumptions about the nature of reality. Their research suggested that consciousness might be non-local, that it might persist beyond physical death, and that it might be capable of directly influencing physical events in ways that violated accepted scientific principles. These discoveries placed Vatican researchers in an extraordinary position. They possessed scientific evidence that supported traditional religious teachings about the soul, the afterlife, and the supernatural. But they also understood that releasing this information would destabilize both scientific and religious institutions. If consciousness survived death, if human beings possessed capabilities that transcended physical limitations, if the boundary between natural and supernatural was more fluid than commonly believed, then both scientific materialism and institutional religion would require fundamental revision. The Vatican's response to this dilemma reveals something profound about the relationship between knowledge and power in contemporary civilization. Rather than sharing their discoveries with the broader scientific community or incorporating them into church teaching, Vatican officials chose to classify the research and continue the investigations in secret. They had discovered evidence that could have revolutionized human understanding of consciousness, death, and the nature of reality itself. But they chose to treat this knowledge as a strategic asset rather than a gift to humanity. The consciousness files also reveal something else that's even more troubling. Evidence that other institutions had reached similar conclusions independently. References to coordination with governmental consciousness research programs appear throughout the Vatican documents, suggesting that intelligence agencies, military organizations, and corporate research facilities had all discovered aspects of the same phenomena and had reached similar decisions about the need for secrecy. The implications are staggering. If multiple institutions possess scientific evidence for the existence of non-material aspects of human consciousness, if they have developed techniques for manipulating spiritual experience, and if they have chosen to keep this knowledge secret, then our entire understanding of human nature and human potential may have been deliberately limited to serve institutional interests. The Vatican Observatory, in other words, wasn't just studying the stars. It was mapping the territory of human consciousness itself. And what it discovered there was apparently so significant that it has been hidden from the rest of humanity for nearly half a century. The real question isn't whether consciousness survives death or whether human beings possess psychic capabilities. It's why institutions that possess evidence for these phenomena have chosen to conceal rather than reveal their discoveries. The consciousness files suggest that the Vatican, along with other powerful institutions, may possess knowledge about human nature that would fundamentally alter how we understand ourselves and our place in the universe. But this knowledge remains locked away, accessible only to a small group of initiated insiders, while the rest of humanity continues to operate according to assumptions that may be fundamentally incomplete or entirely incorrect. In the spring of 2017, Pope Francis announced the Vatican's most ambitious transparency initiative in its history: the complete digitization of the secret archives, with the promise that modern technology would finally make the Church's historical treasures accessible to scholars and the public worldwide. The project, officially called the Digital Vatican Library, was presented as a revolutionary step toward openness, a technological solution to centuries of accusations about Vatican secrecy. The Pope himself blessed the initiative, describing it as a way to open the treasures of human knowledge to all humanity. But as the digitization project progressed, something unexpected began to emerge from the data. Computer scientists working on the project, equipped with advanced artificial intelligence systems capable of analyzing vast quantities of text for patterns and correlations, began to discover connections between documents that had never been noticed by human researchers. The AI systems, free from the assumptions and limitations that influenced human interpretation, identified patterns that revealed a startling truth. The Vatican Secret Archives contained evidence of historical narratives that contradicted virtually every major assumption about the development of Western civilization. The discovery began with a simple observation. When AI systems analyzed the complete corpus of medieval documents, they identified linguistic patterns and conceptual frameworks that suggested far more sophisticated philosophical and scientific understanding than traditional histories had attributed to medieval thinkers. References to astronomical calculations, mathematical principles, and technological innovations appeared consistently throughout documents from periods when such knowledge was supposedly unknown in Europe. But the pattern went deeper. Cross-referencing systems revealed that documents from different centuries and different regions contained identical technical information, often described in similar language, suggesting the existence of knowledge preservation and transmission networks that operated across centuries and continents. The traditional narrative of medieval ignorance, followed by Renaissance rediscovery, began to look like a deliberate fabrication designed to obscure the true continuity of advanced knowledge throughout European history. Even more disturbing were the correlations the AI systems discovered between historical events and documentary patterns. Major political developments, religious reforms, scientific breakthroughs, and cultural movements consistently coincided with specific types of Vatican document creation and classification activities. The pattern suggested that many supposedly spontaneous historical developments had actually been planned, coordinated, and managed by Vatican authorities working in collaboration with other powerful institutions. The AI analysis revealed something else that was even more troubling: evidence of systematic document editing and revision that continued well into the modern period. Textual analysis showed that thousands of documents had been altered, with specific types of information consistently removed or modified. The pattern of these alterations wasn't random. It systematically eliminated references to alternative historical narratives, suppressed evidence of advanced ancient knowledge, and removed documentation of coordinated activities between religious and secular authorities. But perhaps the most significant discovery was what the AI systems revealed about the digitization project itself. The computer algorithms identified embedded code within the digital files that wasn't visible to human users, but that could be detected by sophisticated analysis software. This code appeared to function as a form of digital redaction, automatically hiding or modifying specific types of information when the files were accessed through normal research channels. The Vatican's digitization project, in other words, wasn't actually increasing access to historical information. It was creating a more sophisticated system of information control. Researchers using the digital archives would have access to carefully edited versions of documents, while the complete original information remained hidden behind layers of digital encryption and algorithmic filtering. The implications of this discovery transformed our understanding of the entire digitization initiative. Rather than representing a move toward transparency, the digital Vatican Library was actually the culmination of centuries of information control techniques, using modern technology to create unprecedented capabilities for managing and manipulating access to historical knowledge. Future researchers would have the illusion of complete access while actually receiving only information that had been deemed safe for public consumption. But the story gets even more complex. The computer scientists who made these discoveries weren't supposed to have access to the analytical tools that revealed the hidden patterns. The AI systems they were using had been provided by external technology companies that apparently had their own interests in analyzing Vatican information. The Vatican's digitization project had inadvertently created a situation where multiple parties were simultaneously attempting to control and exploit the same information, leading to a digital Cold War fought with algorithms and encryption keys instead of conventional weapons. The digital paradox revealed by the Vatican's Transparency Initiative extends far beyond the specific case of church archives. It demonstrates how advanced technology can be used to create the appearance of openness, while actually enabling more sophisticated forms of information control than were ever possible in the pre-digital era. The promise of digital transparency can mask the reality of algorithmic manipulation, creating situations where people believe they have access to complete information while actually receiving only carefully curated selections. This realization has profound implications for how we understand knowledge and truth in the digital age. If powerful institutions can use artificial intelligence to automatically filter and modify information while maintaining the appearance of complete access, then the traditional methods for distinguishing truth from propaganda may no longer be adequate. The Vatican's digital archives may be just the beginning of a new era in which information control becomes invisible and therefore more effective than ever before. The real secret revealed by the digitization project isn't any particular historical fact or document. It's the demonstration that modern technology can be used to make censorship and manipulation more sophisticated and more difficult to detect than ever before. The Vatican Secret Archives may have been digitized, but they remain secret in ways that are more subtle and more comprehensive than anything achieved through traditional methods of physical restriction. The question isn't whether the Vatican has finally opened its archives to public scrutiny. It's whether any institution in the digital age can truly be held accountable when the technology of information control has advanced faster than the technology of information access. The morning light filtering through the narrow windows of the Vatican's secret archives carries with it the weight of 8 centuries, illuminating dust motes that dance above manuscripts containing the collected secrets of Western civilization. But as we reach the end of our journey through these hidden chambers, we must confront a question that extends far beyond the specific case of Vatican secrecy. What does it mean to live in a world where the guardians of knowledge have the power to determine not just what we know, but what we're capable of knowing? The archivists who move through these spaces, carefully preserving and selectively revealing the documents that shape our understanding of history, occupy a unique position in human civilization. They are the keepers of collective memory, the curators of cultural inheritance, the arbiters of what future generations will understand about their past. But they are also human beings, shaped by institutional loyalties, political pressures, and personal convictions that influence their decisions about what information deserves preservation and what deserves suppression. This human element in knowledge curation creates a fundamental paradox that extends far beyond the Vatican walls. Every archive, every library, Every educational institution, every media organization faces similar decisions about what information to preserve, how to present it, and when to make it available. The difference between the Vatican Secret Archives and other institutions isn't the fact of curation. It's the scope, sophistication, and longevity of the curatorial process. The Vatican's archivists have had 8 centuries to refine their methods, to develop sophisticated understanding of how information shapes consciousness and behavior, and to create systems that can maintain institutional control across generations and political changes. They have learned to recognize which types of knowledge pose genuine threats to established order, and which can be safely released to create the appearance of transparency without undermining essential power structures. But this expertise in information control raises profound questions about the nature of truth itself. If our understanding of history, science, and human nature has been shaped by centuries of systematic curation, if the information we use to make sense of our world has been filtered through institutional interests that we don't fully understand, then how can we be confident that our beliefs and assumptions reflect reality rather than the preferences of those who control access to information? The question becomes even more complex when we consider the possibility that the Vatican archivists themselves may not fully understand the implications of their curatorial decisions. The institutional knowledge that guides their work has been accumulated over centuries, passed down through generations of archivists who inherited systems and principles that were developed in response to historical circumstances that no longer exist. Current archivists may be faithfully implementing policies that were designed to address threats and opportunities that disappeared centuries ago, while inadvertently creating new problems that they don't recognize or understand. This suggests a deeper paradox about institutional knowledge and power. Institutions that successfully maintain control over long periods may become prisoners of their own success, forced to continue implementing strategies that no longer serve their interests, simply because abandoning those strategies would require admitting that they were unnecessary or counterproductive. The Vatican's continuing secrecy about many of its holdings may reflect not confident control, but institutional anxiety about the consequences of transparency. The psychological dimension of this dilemma extends to those of us who consume the information that institutions choose to release. We face our own version of the archivist's paradox. We want access to complete and accurate information, but we also depend on institutional authorities to filter and interpret information in ways that make it manageable and useful. The alternative, attempting to process the raw complexity of reality without institutional mediation, might prove overwhelming or paralyzing for most people. This creates a symbiotic relationship between institutional information control and individual psychological comfort. We demand transparency while simultaneously relying on opacity, insisting on our right to know while depending on others to decide what we need to know. The Vatican's archivists, in this sense, may be performing a service that we simultaneously resent and require. They bear the burden of knowledge that might be too complex, too disturbing, or too destabilizing for broader consumption. But this comfortable arrangement comes with costs that we're only beginning to understand. If we allow institutions to determine the boundaries of acceptable knowledge, if we accept curatorial decisions without understanding the principles that guide them, if we mistake managed information for complete information, then we risk creating a civilization that operates according to assumptions that may be incomplete, outdated, or entirely incorrect. The Vatican Secret Archives, in this sense, represent more than just a collection of hidden documents. They represent a test of our collective commitment to truth and our willingness to confront the complexity of reality without institutional mediation. The archivists behind those locked doors force us to confront our own relationship with knowledge and power, our own tolerance for uncertainty and complexity, our own capacity for handling information that challenges our fundamental assumptions about ourselves and our world. The keepers of these secrets, ultimately, are not just Vatican employees with keys to restricted collections. They are all of us. Every time we choose comfortable assumptions over difficult questions, institutional authority over independent investigation, managed narratives over complex realities. The secret archives exist not just in Rome, but in our own minds, in the information we choose to seek or avoid, in the questions we choose to ask or suppress. The real dilemma facing the keepers of Vatican secrets may be the same dilemma facing all of us. How to balance the human need for stable beliefs with the moral obligation to pursue truth. How to maintain social cohesion while acknowledging uncomfortable realities. How to preserve the benefits of civilization while remaining open to the possibility that some of our most fundamental assumptions might be wrong. As I write these final words, the Vatican Secret Archives continue their ancient rhythm. Documents are cataloged, files are classified, researchers submit applications that will be denied or granted according to criteria that remain opaque. The archivists who guard these collections continue their careful work, making decisions about revelation and concealment that will shape human understanding for generations to come. The cycle continues, as it has for 8 centuries, as it likely will for centuries to come. But something has changed in our relationship with institutional secrecy. The questions we've explored together about power and knowledge, about truth and control, about the price of institutional stability and the cost of hidden information. These questions can no longer be dismissed as paranoid speculation or academic curiosity. The evidence we've examined, drawn from the Vatican's own gradually released documents, demonstrates that institutions do systematically control information, that they do coordinate their activities across centuries, that they do possess knowledge that could fundamentally alter public understanding of history, science, and human nature. This doesn't mean that every conspiracy theory is correct or that all institutional authority is illegitimate. It means that the burden of proof has shifted. It means that claims of institutional transparency and accountability must be evaluated against demonstrated patterns of secrecy and deception. It means that we can no longer assume that the information available to us represents the complete picture, even when it comes from sources that we've been taught to trust. The Vatican Secret Archives force us to confront a question that extends far beyond religious or historical concerns. What happens to human civilization when the gap between what institutions know and what the public knows becomes too large to bridge? What happens when the people responsible for making democratic decisions are operating with information that is incomplete, outdated, or deliberately distorted? What happens when the accumulated secrets of centuries become too heavy for any institution to bear? These questions don't have easy answers, but they deserve serious consideration. The alternative, continuing to operate according to assumptions that may be fundamentally incorrect, while powerful institutions make decisions based on information that we're not allowed to access, may prove to be unsustainable in an era when technology makes both information control and information revelation more powerful than ever before. The Vatican's recent digitization efforts, regardless of their motivations or their ultimate effects, represent recognition that the traditional methods of information control are no longer adequate for contemporary challenges. The Church's gradual document releases, however limited and strategic they may be, acknowledge that complete secrecy is no longer politically viable. The institution that perfected the art of information control over 8 centuries is being forced to adapt to a world where information wants to be free, and secrets are increasingly difficult to maintain. This creates a symbiotic relationship between institutional information control and individual psychological comfort. We demand transparency while simultaneously relying on opacity, insisting on our right to know while depending on others to decide what we need to know. The Vatican's archivists, in this sense, may be performing a service that we simultaneously resent and require. They bear the burden of knowledge that might be too complex, too disturbing, or too destabilizing for broader consumption. But this comfortable arrangement comes with costs that we're only beginning to understand. If we allow institutions to determine the boundaries of acceptable knowledge, if we accept curatorial decisions without understanding the principles that guide them, if we mistake managed information for complete information, then we risk creating a civilization that operates according to assumptions that may be incomplete, outdated, or entirely incorrect. The Vatican Secret Archives, in this sense, represent more than just a collection of hidden documents. They represent a test of our collective commitment to truth and our willingness to confront the complexity of reality without institutional mediation. The archivists behind those locked doors force us to confront our own relationship with knowledge and power, our own tolerance for uncertainty and complexity, our own capacity for handling information that challenges our fundamental assumptions about ourselves and our world. The keepers of these secrets, ultimately, are not just Vatican employees with keys to restricted collections. They are all of us. Every time we choose comfortable assumptions over difficult questions, institutional authority over independent investigation, managed narratives over complex realities. The secret archives exist not just in Rome, but in our own minds, in the information we choose to seek or avoid, in the questions we choose to ask or suppress. The real dilemma facing the keepers of Vatican secrets may be the same dilemma facing all of us. How to balance the human need for stable beliefs with the moral obligation to pursue truth. How to maintain social cohesion while acknowledging uncomfortable realities. How to preserve the benefits of civilization while remaining open to the possibility that some of our most fundamental assumptions might be wrong.